Meeting Chris Benoit was undoubtedly my favorite wrestler encounter ever. But 3 weeks later, Chris changed how we would remember him forever.
You're listening to The Signature Spot with Chris Toplack.
It's May 28th, 2007, my birthday. Days before, a colleague mentioned she'd be interviewing Chris Benoit for our college radio station. She was studying journalism. I was studying radio broadcasting. We were both working at the station over the summer. She knew Chris Benoit was one of my favorite wrestlers and quickly realized I had to be there. It was a beautiful morning. We were standing outside the John Labatt Centre, later renamed Budweiser Gardens, now Canada Life Place, just for full context. And it was before 8 a.m. He pulled up in a limo, all smiles, WWE rep in tow. We shook hands, we introduced ourselves, and he joked, "Boy, I feel like a ghost." And I always felt that was kind of strange because he was very tanned. So I said, "If you feel like a ghost, I must be Casper." I'm still very pale. He laughed loudly and genuinely, and my colleague ran through her interview, and it was the standard soundbite stuff. I don't blame her for it, obviously. What's your favorite move? How did you get started? What can you promise tomorrow on SmackDown, which was the television taping on Tuesday? And I was already answering every question in my head before she finished asking. So once she wrapped, I chatted with Chris for nearly 10 minutes, half a dozen questions, all off the record. And that kind of brought his guard down. But what also brought his guard down was the fact that I treated him like a normal human being. One thing I always have stayed true to, especially when I was interviewing musicians, was not to, fanboy over that encounter. And I guess in the wrestling world is not to act like a mark, right? So I was very respectful, and I know that he appreciated that because he took the time to answer all my questions. Did not rush whatsoever. So what came to mind first was asking about the Super J Cup and the Royal Rumble, because I've always felt the Super J Cup in '94 was one of his most impressive nights of his career. So I asked about that. What was the best performance of your career? Was it the Royal Rumble 2004 or was it the Super J Cup in 1994? And something that was interesting, I've never heard him speak about this in any interview, was he noted that Super J Cup was always a special night. He had a lot of respect for the Japanese wrestlers over there, learned a lot. Upon winning the Royal Rumble, the Super J Cup came immediately to mind because it was so physically and mentally exhausting. So his time in Japan was very special, and he said he learned a lot from his opponents and his peers over there. We briefly talked about Stampede Wrestling and the Hearts. I don't really recall all the details of that. For the life of me, I've always tried to, but I think I more so was just at that point wanting to pick his brain as much as possible. But I did close with this, and I was very specific when I asked it. What advice would you give to AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe? I think they're too good for TNA, and I'd love to see them in WWE with you. And I felt that way, and I still feel that way, that at the time, especially Samoa Joe, could have made waves on the WWE roster. I don't know if Christopher Daniels would have ever gotten his fair shake over there, just due to being labeled undersized. And AJ eventually did. He really found himself in Japan more than anywhere. So it worked out for two of them. Without any hesitation, Chris said that each of those men should take a chance and come over, and he was sure that they would be successful in WWE. He even mentioned that he wondered what it would be like to step in the ring with them, and he called them three of the best wrestlers in the world, and he emphasized that word, wrestlers, which was amazing. Again, I'm getting these pieces of information I've never heard him discuss before. So after about 10 minutes, we shook hands, parted ways, and he couldn't have been a nicer person to me. In fact, we took a photo together, and I'm 6'2". I'm very lanky, so I had to lean over, and he joked, "You're making me look taller than I already am." And I had that photo as my Facebook profile pic until the news broke in June. So that's what, 3.5 weeks. And my cell phone rang off the hook. So many friends associated this death with me. Not that I was to blame, obviously, but they were just thinking, God, Chris has got to be devastated over what happened. And I was. I mean, the original details were so blurry and ambiguous, though, that it led me and some others to question, there's got to be more to this story. So I don't know if we were as shocked as many others, but we were still shocked and appalled. How could you not be? Because once the details come out, you're disgusted and you're confused and you mourn for Nancy and Daniel and you feel guilty for the admiration you had for Chris. But then you realize, well, you had admiration for him as a professional wrestler. You didn't know him as a human being, but it vanishes. And I know that there are many that can't separate the wrestler from the person. I don't blame them one bit. I completely understand and empathize with it. I can still watch a Chris Benoit match, and it's awkward, but I also believe that it matters for the opponent. I once heard Kurt Angle remark something similar. I don't know the exact quote, and it stuck with me, where Kurt Angle was mentioning some of the best matches I've ever had were with Chris Benoit. And since he's been erased, which I don't blame WWE for, but since he's been erased, people forget about those matches, like Royal Rumble 2003, which was a clinic, or some of the triple threat matches they were in together. But those two had incredible chemistry, and I felt bad that you have this portion of Kurt Angle's career where it's virtually ignored, especially at the WWE level, because they just don't want to promote or showcase his work. So I mostly watch those matches with the opponent in mind more than anybody else, not Chris. But I'll say this. I've interviewed wrestlers, musicians, business figures, quite a few people I've been fortunate to interview or interact with over the years, and other celebrities across my radio career, podcast ventures, working for various organizations. And really, despite his morbid and unforgivable final days, to this day, that morning outside the John Labatt Centre on my birthday remains one of my most memorable experiences.